So it's a pleasure to be here and to talk about in situ, which is the main component, the active component of the certified nutritionals glycemic control product. And Diana made a very good point talking about the pandemic of diabetes and prediabetes, and we're very thrilled to share the latest data on our ingredient. And I'm sure you will find out that at the end of this presentation, in situ and certified nutritional glycemic control can really become your best ally for maintenance of healthy glycemic function. So glycemic control, as you heard, is a brand that incorporates only science-based ingredients, and we are particularly proud to partner with Certified Naturals and Gordon Global as a Canadian company. Our ingredient has been developed and is still manufactured and sourced from Canadian origin. So we are very proud of that contribution from our country to a global health pandemic like this one. And we are particularly proud to support certified natural products with these types of events. So just to bring some numbers in the discussion and more precision on what Diana was already talking about, we all know that there is an epidemic of diabetes across the world now, and anywhere from about 9.5 to 10% of the adult population in North America is already considered type 2 diabetic. But we rarely hear about the underlying causes of that pandemic. And I mean by that prediabetes. So before reaching the stage where a type 2 diabetes can be reached, can be diagnosed, a lot of people will go through that stage of prediabetes. And prediabetes is, basically an elevation of any of the glycemic parameters that doesn't reach the level where type 2 diabetes is diagnosed. And prediabetes actually is a matter of concern because some of the health consequences of diabetes are already present with prediabetes. Now, when you look at the data, we can see that there's 90 million adults across North America that have to cope with prediabetes. So that's roughly 23% in Canada and 34% in America, in US. So add to that the 10% of diabetic in both countries, and that leaves you with anywhere between 33 to 44% of the population. So those are very high number of people that are affected. And one of the issues that we are facing with prediabetes is that people really don't know that they have the condition because they don't feel their blood sugar. They don't feel it's too high or it's too low unless it reaches very low levels, but they don't feel their blood sugar accurately. So they are unaware of the condition. For most people, preventing blood sugar problems comes with maintaining optimal body weight. So they will try to stay lean and active, and that will be their way to prevent apparition of any problems with their blood sugar content. Well, that's true for some metabolic diseases, but for prediabetes, it's actually not exactly true. And here I'm showing the results of a survey where people compile the prevalence of prediabetes among different classes of body weight. And you can see that prediabetes is actually pretty present even in normal weight individuals at about 22%. When we look at the overweight population, we are at the range of 35%. So these are people that are not obese. They are just in the healthy BMI range of 20 to 30 or 18.5 to 30. And these are people that still have to be worried about their blood sugar levels. So obese are not the only ones at risk. So when we look at the 90 million people that are pre-diabetic currently in North America, we can actually find out who is providing this population. Is it coming from the obese population or is it coming from the non-obese population? And what we found out is that about 33 out of the 90 million people are actually coming from the obese population, but the bulk of that population, 57 million people, are actually normal and overweight, slightly overweight individuals that would usually believe that they are protected against any type of blood sugar disturbance. So obesity is definitely a facilitator of diabetes and prediabetes, but it is not the end of the story. Glycemic health may in fact affect, glycemic health issues may in fact affect anyone, but there's hope. And we have recent new clinical results that show how a new solution can be brought to these people. So who are those people? What are the characteristics of these people that are thin, but still have to be worried about their blood sugar levels? Well, these people, the science has an acronym for it, a name for it. It's called TOFI. So it means thin outside, fat inside. So basically it means the person is lean when you look at her, but inside her metabolism is actually that of an obese person. And obviously, the reason for that is hidden inside the body. So we have here two pictures, two MRI scans of different persons. Both are men. They are 35 years old. They have the same body mass index. They have the same percentage of body fat. So the distinction between those two persons is where the body stored its body fat. If you look at the person to the right, you will see that all of the white substance, which is the fat, is stored in the subcutaneous compartment of the body, which is a very safe place to hold and to store body fat. The reason is very simple, is that all of that fat is generating pro-inflammatory mediators, pro-inflammatory cytokines. And when the fat is in the subcutaneous compartment, the cytokines will actually be very diffused in the body. So there will not be any target organ. There will not be any definitive signal or definitive action point of these cytokines on the body. It will be like this dissolved across the whole mass of the body. However, when you look at the person to the left, you will see that there's a lot of white substance around the internal cavity, the internal organs of this person. So around the spleen, the liver, the heart, all of these organs are actually surrounded with fat. And what happens is that now the inflammatory cytokines produced by this fat is all drained through the portal vein, which empties into the liver. So liver is actually the first organ to be affected by those inflammatory cytokines. So we will see some inflammation at the liver given the localization of the fat. But we will also see infiltration of fat inside the organs, inside the liver, inside the muscles. And these organs, when they are infiltrated with fat, they will turn more insulin resistant. So you will start to see a desensitization to insulin action in that person to the left. So when we look at the consequences of that high visceral fat content, obviously there will be liver fat accumulation, there will be insulin resistance, and ultimately there will be prediabetes for that person on the left. And statistics shows that 40% of the non-obese person are TOFI. So we, 4 out of 10 person here tonight have a fat deposit inside their liver, have an inflammation source that is driving inflammation in the liver, and has a significant amount of visceral fat. So let's try to look at the causes. Why are we seeing so many people with prediabetes today? Why are we seeing 40% of people, even the non-obese, with fatty liver? We have a solution. We have suggestion that this may come from the diet, and more specifically from the carbohydrate component in the diet. The reason is that we are eating carbohydrates at levels never seen before in our history. I'm showing you here a graph that depicts the sugar availability per person per year over the past 200 years. So those are US data, but you can imagine that Canadian data should be about the same. And what we see from that graph is that actually sugar availability started to increase from 1820 to 1920. That was due to the apparition in the society of various consumer products, such as soft drinks, chocolate industry, the confectionery industry, and things like that, candy industry. So all of these contributed their small part to increasing the global availability of sugar across the population. In 1920, the amount stopped to increase, so we hit a plateau, and that lasted for about 50 more years. Now, what happened to break that plateau was the publication in 1977 of dietary goals in the US. Now, this was the first food guide, and it was the first time that authoritative body pointed out what component in our food was responsible for making us, obese and for making us, susceptible to cardiovascular diseases. And that component was identified as fat. So starting from 1977, food manufacturers started removing fat from their products and replacing fat simply with carbohydrates, because when you remove fat, you remove taste, you remove texture, and carbohydrate brings that back to the product. It brings texture, it brings taste. And so they could, basically propose some healthy, apparently healthy products, low-fat products, but filled with carbohydrates under various forms. It can be sugar, but it can be starch, it can be maltodextrins. All of that are synonyms, and they will act exactly the same on our bodies. So the results is that we now consume very high amount of carbohydrates. We eat about 40 kg of added sugar on an annual basis. Those are Canadian numbers, by the way. And the Canadian Heart and Stroke Association or Foundation recommends that we should limit our intake of added sugar by to 10 kg per year, but ideally to less than 5 kg. So we're 4 to 8 times exceeding the recommended safe level as per the Heart and Stroke recommendations. So obviously this has to come with consequences, and to look more into these consequences, there have been some studies that explore the impact of high carb diets on liver health and on global metabolism. So if we look here at animal trials, we have here a mouse trial where we looked at the impact of a high carb diet versus a high fat diet for the implications on liver fat content. Now, what you see on the bottom left side of this screen with the blue bar is the impact of the high fat diet on liver fat content. And you can see that a high fat diet is not inducing much of a gain of liver fat compared to the baseline. Now, if you look at the high carb diet, the orange bar, you can see that the high carb diet actually converted or contributed to an increase of 54% liver fat content over and above the high fat diet. So it is very clear here that carbohydrates that are ingested by these animals have been converted to fat in the liver and are now accumulated and may contribute to some problems, metabolic problems in these animals. In addition, I mentioned the impact of these cytokines and the surrounding fat content on liver inflammation. You can see that both myeloperoxidase and nitric oxide have been induced drastically by the intake of high carb diet. So we see these two markers of an overactive immune system being increased drastically. So there is definitely some inflammation process going on in the liver of these high carb animals. Now let's look at human data. What happens when we provide a high carb diet to humans? Is it the same as in animals? Well, for that, we have searched the literature and found that study that evaluated the impact of a high carb diet versus a high fat diet in 15 men on blood lipids. So basically, people were put for 4 weeks on a high fat diet. Then we looked at plasma triglycerides, and then we switched them over to a high carb diet, and we look again after 4 weeks on their level of plasma triglycerides. Now, what you can see here in the graph is that every single person that switched from the high fat to a high carb diet saw an increase on average by 178%, but the highest increase has been 457% in their triglyceride levels. So if you go to a blood test and your doctor tells you that you have high triglyceride levels, well, don't look for your intake of fat over the past weeks. Look for your intake of carbs. That will be where you will find your culprit. So not only have they found that big increase in triglyceride, but they were also able to show that this triglyceride increase was essentially due to the production of triglycerides by the liver. Now, what happens when we remove carbohydrates? Are we able to, restore and repair the liver health? Well, that has been tested as well. So recently, there was that trial where they conducted a 2-week intervention trial with an isocaloric low-carb drink. So to make it in simple terms, people that were eating a certain amount of calories every day, we replace those calories by a low-carb drink. So they don't eat anything else than the low-carb drink for 2 weeks. And obviously, those subjects, they were obese people with high liver fat content. They only will consume for 2 weeks that low-carb drink. So the design of that study was what we call a weight-stable design. So it was designed to make sure that people will not lose weight. In fact, whenever one person would lose weight by the change of diet, we would instruct them to eat more or to drink more of that low-carb drink on the next days so that their body weight will remain constant. The idea behind that is that we want to see the impact of the substitution of carbohydrate intake from a high carb to a low carb diet, but separately from the impact on body weight. So the results are presented here, and you can see on the left side that actually the weight stable design was very effective at maintaining body weight of these people. The body weight remained stable for everyone in the study. But if you look on the right side, you will see the liver fat content went down very significantly by an average 44% at the end of the 14 days. But this decrease was already significant after 1 day. So just a single day without carbs already improves liver health. So this is very important. In fact, that we can both improve liver health without when we remove carbs, but it's also important to see that we can basically separate liver health and liver fat content from the overall appearance of body of a person. We can basically improve liver health without changing body weight. So this is a very important message. And obviously, with what we know now about liver health, we know now that better liver health will be the basis for better long-term glycemic health. So just a few take-home messages at this point of the presentation so that we can sum up. So we've identified a huge problem in our diet today. We eat way too much carbs under different forms. It can be starch, it can be sugar. All of these carbs actually promote the accumulation of visceral fat. This is the fat around the organs and inside the visceral cavity. So that can be with or without obesity. It doesn't really matter. And this accumulation of visceral fat will basically fuel the prediabetes epidemic we're seeing right now. So the good news is that we are having a 30, well, I put it as a good news. It's not a good news. It's an opportunity. We have 32.5% of Canadians that are actually needing to hear about this product, a product like a certified Naturals Glycemic Control product. So as we mentioned before, the main ingredient in glycemic control is in situ. We are the manufacturer of in situ. What is this ingredient? This is a blend of natural polyphenols that come from 2 wild-crafted brown seaweeds. The seaweeds are Ascophyllum nodosum and Fucus vesiculosus. So the common name of these are kelp and bladderwrack. They are very abundant on the east coast of Canada. This is where we source these seaweeds. We extract the seaweeds with a process that involves only hot water. So there's no solvent, no chemical involved at any stage. The process is thus very clean. And as a result, the product is organic certified. It doesn't contain any genetically modified organism. The product is also GRAS affirmed. So this is the acronym for generally recognized as safe. This is basically the standard for food use of a product. And the product obviously doesn't contain any gluten, any other types of added excipient or drying aids. So the product is very pure, 100% coming from seaweed. We've got great amount of science to support a low effective dosage of 500 milligrams a day. And we've got Health Canada approved claims for helping to support healthy blood glucose levels and helping to reduce the glycemic index of ingested foods. These are the two claims that you will also find on certified Naturals Glycemic Control label. I've talked briefly about our sustainable local sourcing, but that has come very important in the past years, given the pandemic, given the disruption of some supply chains across the world. But besides that, we found it was very important to maintain the local sourcing, because we know how these people work with the biomass. We know that we are partnering with the best person in the world to harvest and take care of our seaweeds. So seaweeds takes only place on the east coast of Canada. This is where we harvest 100% of our seaweeds. The collection of seaweed is done by hands, and you can see those are actual pictures of our harvesters in action. You can see that they are using some kind of rake, and this rake will basically help them cut a certain length of the seaweeds that is just for the growing part of the seaweed. So every year this part will regrow. But the bottom part, the part that attaches to the sea floor remains intact, and that's very important so that the seaweed can regrow year after year. So our partner has designed this method for harvesting about 50 years ago, and now they continue to maintain a strict monitoring of the biomass and the seaweed beds. So they record how much seaweeds they land annually. They also conduct annual census to make sure that the biomass remains available in large amounts, and they make essentially a constant supervision of their seaweed beds to ensure that the biomass is very well exploited in a sustainable way. Very importantly, we're not using any stranded seaweeds, so the seaweeds that will naturally detach due to storms or any other types of stress that land on the beaches. We don't use these seaweed because there would be some quality control concerns with those type of seaweed. So we use only fresh harvested seaweeds. The extraction of these seaweeds is done by innoVactiv in the province of Quebec. So we transform it also entirely in Canada. And most of the research that support and that I presented to you, or that I will be presenting you today, so the safety, the in vitro, the animal and human data, most of that has been done at various universities and independent research centers in Canada, but we've also done some of that research in UK and in Italy. So the care that we take into maintaining our sourcing in Canada has made this resource one of the best managed marine resource in Canada, and we're very proud of contributing to that. So in situ has a very unique mechanism of action. It works basically two ways. It works on the two main carbohydrates found in our diet today. So it works on starch, it works on sugar. Those are the major forms under which we eat carbs. And as you look at these molecules, they are very big molecules. They are too big. They cannot enter the bloodstream as is. They will need to be broken down to the actual glucose molecule, which is just one of these little hexagon rings. And the process to achieve that digestion is actually our digestive enzymes. So for starch, the first step of this process will involve the enzyme called alpha amylase. So alpha amylase will basically cut the starch molecule in smaller fragments, but these fragments are still too big. So they will require a second step of breakdown to achieve to yield the glucose molecule. The sugar, that second step, will involve an enzyme called alpha glucosidase, and alpha glucosidase also takes care of sugar and other smaller sugar that we have in our diet. So at the end of this process, which is very effective, it occurs within about 15 to 30 minutes after your meal. All of the carbohydrates that you have had on your meal is digested. All of that is inside your intestines and will basically flood the bloodstream, and that will create a very large glycemic response. Now, in situ works very simply. It will block those two enzymes. It will block alpha amylase. It will block alpha glucosidase, and it will make that whole digestion process of starch and sugar much less effective and occurring at a slower pace. So to make it clear, we're not promoting or preventing the digestion of sugar and carbs from occurring. We will ultimately digest all of these carbs, but we will digest it at a slower pace. And that pace is very important. It's really much like when there is a rainfall. So if you have a steady rainfall, for example, a few inches over a week, there will be no problem with the sewage or the accumulation of water. But if that few inches of water fall in an hour, well, you may be seeing some flooding everywhere, that there will be accumulation, the system is overflown and everything. The same goes with sugar. So when glucose enters the bloodstream at a very fast pace after a meal, well, then we have some damages. We have glycation, we have oxidative stress, we have inflammation that is generated. But when glucose enters the bloodstream at a slower pace, well, we are preventing those three damages from occurring, and we do that without spending too much insulin. So that's very important. Now, we're very proud of the superior efficacy of in situ compared to all other extracts that are available on the marketplace that claim to have the same type of efficacy. So we've compared here the efficacy of in situ, which is the blue bar on the left, to all other extracts that are reputed to have the same action. And you can see that even products like white kidney bean, which has been hugely popular, don't perform as much compared to in situ. Now, we were very surprised to see how white kidney bean was outperformed. And in fact, we were doubting that maybe our method was not adapted to this specific molecule or extract. So instead of arguing with people, how is it possible, we simply sent out in situ to be tested on the white kidney bean testing platform. And we ended up with a very high inhibition rate at 75,700 alpha amylase inhibitory units per gram. That is for in situ. And the standard for white kidney bean is 3,000 alpha amylase inhibitory units per gram. So we're basically 25 times more potent than white kidney bean. That is when we test on their own platform. Now, if you look at the second enzyme, if you look at alpha glucosidase, we also outperform all other extracts that are specifically targeting alpha glucosidase. So we are basically having the only extract available today that inhibits both alpha amylase and alpha glucosidase. Even when you compare to other types of brown seaweed extracts that you can find in France or in Brazil, we're not seeing the same type of efficacy because they don't process the seaweed in the right way. So I will now move on to human trials. We have two types of human trials. We have short-term, meaning that we have basically administered the product once, and we looked at the impact of this administration over one meal. And we also have long-term trials. So I will cover these two types of trials tonight. So in terms of the typical protocol we would use for short-term trial, these would be randomized, double-blinded, placebo-controlled. So if you're familiar with these words, that means that it is a very high level of quality for our clinical trials. In this case, we would use healthy subjects with a BMI of 20 to 30. And the meal would be composed of 50 grams of carbohydrates. Can be a starch, or it could be sugar. So for starch, we give white bread. For sugar, it would be a sugar drink. And we provide 500 milligrams of in situ in capsule form before the meal. So obviously, during the 3 hours after meal, we draw blood samples and we measure blood glucose, we measure insulin, and we look at the efficacy of insulin. Now, the results here for a white bread intake shows that under the placebo condition, we see a food that behaves like a high glycemic index food. So we have a sharp increase in blood sugar levels after meal. Within 30 to 45 minutes, the digestion of carbohydrates is almost completed. We reach the peak, and that peak is very sharp, very high. So that would be associated with a large insulin response. Now, when we take in situ, we are able to blunt that increase in blood sugar by 48%. So that's cutting almost half of the glucose out of the bloodstream. And I remind you, this is just due to the slowing down of the carb digestion process. So we are actually reducing the glycemic load and glycemic impact of this starch meal. As a result, because we have a lower peak of blood sugar, we also reduce insulin by 12%. So we have less insulin needed to manage that same meal when we take in situ. And obviously, that means that our insulin has been more effective in its work. So an 8% improvement in insulin efficacy after just one use of the product. So In situ is able to reduce the glycemic stress that follows starch intake. We've also looked at the impact of in situ on sugar intake. So on a sugary drink, we saw a 39% decrease in glycemic response to a sugar drink. We saw at the same time a 7% decrease in the amount of insulin needed, and that transforms into a 5% gain of insulin efficacy after just one use of the product. So we're also able to show that we reduce glycemic stress that follows sugar intake. Now, this third short-term trial is very interesting. We were actually interested to look at the impacts of in situ in healthy versus diabetic patients. And the reason for that is that actually when we undergo that transition from a healthy state to a diabetic state, there is a lot of things that change along the way. So our capacity to produce insulin will change over time. Our capacity to react to insulin, or sensitivity to insulin will also change over time. So when you want to help someone, or when you want to improve the health of someone undergoing that transition, you want to make sure that the mechanism on which you are planning to act will still be there to support the action of your product. So for example, if I want to help someone by improving insulin release, that can work, but if that person doesn't have any capacity to produce insulin, well, I'm not helping her. It's not working. So the process that in situ acts on is the digestion of carbohydrates. And so we went to test this hypothesis that it would actually work both on healthy and diabetic patients alike. So we recruited these participants, and we had a mixed population. We had healthy and diabetic subjects in the same trial. And when we look at all subjects, we saw that in situ actually created the same type of effect that we saw previously, a drop of 28% in the glycemic response to white bread. But what we were very interested in looking was the impact in healthy versus diabetic patients. So in both groups, we saw actually the same type of results. We saw a drop in the post-meal blood sugar response that is very meaningful both in healthy and diabetic patients. So imagine if you are a diabetic person and you see that your blood sugar level falls down as fast as 2 hours after your meal, well, you might be seeing some drastic improvement on your long-term glycemic markers, such as glycated hemoglobin, because this is the most important parameter to look at. So with those results in hand, we move forward to our long-term trials. So the first one I want to talk to you about is called PREVERC. This means prediabetes reversion with in situ. So PREVERC was again a well-designed trial. It was randomized, double-blinded, placebo-controlled. So we involved 65 pre-diabetic men and women in this trial. So everyone was characterized with a fasting blood glucose of 100 to 126. These people were naive, so they were not using any other anti-diabetes drugs. So basically, they were instructed or informed by their doctors that they were pre-diabetic and that they should try to get more physical activity and have a better diet. So when we recruited them, we put them all on a controlled energy diet and a physical activity program. So that helped us to normalize the conditions between subjects and groups, but it also helped us to make sure that we didn't have people that were very health conscious on one side and people that couldn't care less on the other side, which could have skewed the results. So the product that they used was very similar to the one that that Certified Naturals offers you. So the product was 1 capsule per meal, 3 times per day. So each meal was covered with the product, and the product contained 250 milligrams of in situ per capsule. We made some evaluation at a baseline, and then after 3 months and 6 months of treatment, and we looked both at glycemic parameters, and we looked also at systemic inflammation parameter. Now, what I'm going to show you here is how patients were stratified at the beginning of the study and across the different time points of the study. So you see that at day 0, we really had no person in the normal category. So we didn't have any normal patient. All of the subjects were pre-diabetes. Among the pre-diabetic group, we had two different categories. So we had the mild pre-diabetes, which is the center column here, and the scientific term for it is impaired fasting glucose. So this category here is already under loss of insulin function. So their insulin is working less and less. And so whenever they have a meal, their body will produce more insulin than needed to create the same impact on blood sugar levels. So if you look at their blood sugar curve, it will be almost normal, maybe a little bit larger than a healthy subjects, but the reduction in blood sugar is achieved with a very high secretion of insulin. Now, when we reach the end of that adaptation method by the pancreas, you fall in the third category. You move to the right. Those people are called IGT, so that means impaired glucose tolerance. So these people actually have reached the maximum output of their pancreas. It produced the highest level of insulin possible that is possible, but still the insulin resistance is so high that the blood sugar response cannot go back to within normal range in a reasonable time frame. So these people will have very long, prolonged glycemic response after meal. So anyone that you see moving from the right to the left through that animation, you will that means an improvement of their health status. Anyone you see moving from the left to the right will mean that they are still progressing towards diabetes, which would be a fourth column on the right. So from day 0 to 3 months after the beginning, in the in situ group, we saw 4 people improving from advanced prediabetes. 3 of them landed in the middle category, the mild prediabetic section, and 1 person normalized its glycemic status. At the same, over the same time period in the placebo group, we lost 2 subjects, but the other 2 subjects continued to progress towards more advanced prediabetes. Now, in the second period from 3 months to 6 months, in the in situ group, we saw 13 people improving from the advanced prediabetes toward the milder form of prediabetes, and we have 5 subjects that normalized their glycemic status. In the same time period, in the placebo group, we had again 5 persons that degraded their health status, so they continue to progress and advance to impaired glucose tolerance. So you notice that all subjects in the in situ group move to the left, all subjects in the placebo group move to the right. That means that despite all of them being on a physical activity program and diet, in situ really added its contribution and helped them to achieve a better glycemic health. You notice possibly that we have lost some people in the placebo and 1 person in the in situ groups. Those were normal losses. These people were simply not available to participate in the study anymore, so they did not drop out due to any side effects of any kind. Now, we were also following some other parameters, some glycemic parameters and inflammatory parameters. So on glycated hemoglobin, which is very important, we saw a diminution by 3.9% after 6 months. On fasting glucose, the diminution was about 8%. On post-meal glucose, the drop was about 10.5%. And on insulin resistance, actually the function of insulin was improved by 14.8% after 6 months. Now, when we look at systemic inflammation, we saw also reduction on 2 markers. So C-reactive protein dropped by 28.6%, and TNF-alpha dropped by 16.7%. So those were very impressive results in pre-diabetic patients, and that paved the way to moving to diabetic patients. So that last study is called INCODIA, for in situ co-administration in diabetics. So the reason that we chose to co-administer the product with their standard medication was that this will be the case for most people using the product. They will not stop their medication, and we would not recommend it anyway. So it was important to make sure that the product would still be available, still be effective, even in the context of using common anti-diabetic medications. So this trial was a randomized, double-blinded, placebo-controlled, and multi-center study. We recruited 175 type 2 diabetic men and women. They were all adults with glycated hemoglobin over 6.5%, and their body mass index was within the overweight range, so 25 to 30. So we're not talking about very obese participants. We're talking about people that would basically not believe that they have any issue with their blood sugar because they have a mild constitution or a lean constitution. The criteria on medication was there. They should have a stable medication for more than 3 months. So like in the first trial, like in the Preversi trial, we put all of these people on controlled energy diet and also on a physical activity program. The product was used exactly as per the previous trial. So 1 capsule per meal, 3 meals per day, and each capsule contained 250 milligrams of in situ. So again, very comparable to glycemic control product. The evaluation that we made were at time 0 and after 6 months, and we looked at anthropometric measures. We look at fasting glucose, post-meal glucose, and glycated hemoglobin. Now, when we look at the different types of conditions and medications these people were on, they mostly suffered from, obviously, diabetes plus hypercholesterolemia or dyslipidemia. So those were the mix of diseases that we had. And in terms of medications, they were all under some sort of medication. So most of them were under metformin, which is very usual treatment for type 2 diabetic. And the other predominant medication was statin for cholesterol. Now, the results that we saw with the use of the in situ product in combination with the standard treatment, the drug treatment that these people were already using, we saw a 10.8% additional decline on glycated hemoglobin. We saw a 23.4% additional decline in fasting plasma glucose, and we saw a 17% additional decline in post-meal glucose. So those were very impressive results given the fact that these people were already under standard medication. The last bonus feature we found in that study is that there was a 5.6% decrease in waist circumference in the treated group compared to the placebo, the non-treated group. And this decline in waist circumference is an indicator that in situ may contribute to the redistribution of fat storage in the and removal of visceral fat. So those two recent studies really demonstrate the long-term benefits of in situ. We saw strong positive impact of the product on glycemic health as well as systemic inflammation, both in pre-diabetic and diabetic subjects. So we're really able to help people that are in the healthy state all the way to the diabetic state with that product in a very safe and effective manner. It helps to address a large potential market of 90 million people. So that's literally 1 person out of 3 in North America that can benefit from this product. And it's also a support for a continuous use of in situ over 3 to 6 months, which is very different from what we saw when we only had those results for short-term trials where people would be, taking the product once in a while, once every 2 days or 3 days when they had a bad meal. So that's not how we recommend to use the product anymore. We think that with good compliance, you get a higher efficacy, and those trials truly demonstrate that. So certified naturals, glycemic control, obviously you have that formulation here. You have that in situ is the sole medicinal ingredient in the product. So you have the effective dosage that was tested in the product. The recommended dose is 2 capsules once or twice daily. But to me, the best recommendation would be to abide by the latest clinical trials, so 1 capsule before each meal for maximum efficacy. Obviously, the recommended use are the claims: help support healthy blood glucose levels and help to reduce the glycemic index of ingested food. Now, as I mentioned, we have a product that can address a great proportion of the population, 32.5%. I even inserted here more than 32.5% because 32.5 is just the addition of diabetics and pre-diabetics. But you have all people that care about their body weight. They could benefit also from this product. You reduce insulin, you reduce the impact of glucose, obviously. That can be a good contributor to weight management. Keto dieters are also one of your demographics because they strive by their diet to reduce the impact of glucose, and that's what a product like glycemic control can achieve with in situ. So you really have a solution here to help them achieve even stronger benefits from their keto diet. So that would end my presentation.